the United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
Iran is also hitting U.S. bases. Washington has announced that 3 of their soldiers have been killed so far, plus 5 others have been injured.
2.7 tons of high-explosive warheads, fired in a single volley across 600 miles of open desert, arcing over sovereign borders, over sleeping cities, over diplomatic agreements signed in rooms where men shook hands and promised this would never happen. 2.7 tons. Enough destructive force to flatten a city block in downtown Manhattan, launched not at a military formation on an open battlefield, but at American service members asleep in their bunks at 1:47 in the morning. 3 of them did not wake up. 5 more were pulled from wreckage so twisted that the medics triaging the wounded could not immediately tell where the structure ended and the human body began. Before this story is over, you are going to learn exactly how this strike was planned, who authorized it, which intelligence failures allowed it to reach American soil, and what was discovered on a seized hard drive 48 hours later that made Pentagon officials close the briefing room doors and lock them. This was not a battlefield exchange between 2 armies. This was a message, written in fire and delivered to the doorstep of the most powerful military on Earth. And the most terrifying part was not the missiles, it was what came after them. The base was designated Forward Operating Station Kestrel, a joint logistics and intelligence outpost positioned in the northeastern corridor of a region the Pentagon had publicly described as stabilized for the better part of 2 years. Stabilized. That word would become the centerpiece of a congressional inquiry within 72 hours. Kestrel sat at the edge of a wide gravel plain, ringed by low sand-colored barriers and reinforced concrete shelters that had been built during the first rotational deployment to the area. There were approximately 430 American personnel on base that night, a combination of Army logistics specialists, intelligence analysts, a small detachment of Air Force drone operators, and a medical support unit that had arrived only 9 days earlier from Fort Campbell. The wind that evening came from the southwest, warm and dry, carrying fine grit that settled on everything: uniforms, screens, the hoods of the armored vehicles parked along the northern perimeter. The sky was clear. Visibility was unlimited. No one on that base heard the launch. No one saw the contrails. The early warning system, a networked array of radar stations positioned across the theater and linked to a centralized tracking hub, registered the first inbound signature at 1:41 in the morning local time. 6 minutes before impact. 6 minutes is enough time to scramble personnel to harden shelters if the system works as designed. The alarm triggered at 1:43, 2 minutes lost in automated verification cycling. 2 minutes that would later be measured in human lives. The first missile struck the eastern housing block, a row of modular sleeping quarters that held 62 soldiers. The blast tore through the roof of the 3rd unit and detonated inside the structure itself, collapsing the walls inward. The second missile hit 17 seconds later, impacting a maintenance bay 40 meters north. The third struck the medical staging area. The fourth missed the base entirely, burying itself in the gravel plain 200 yards east with enough force to leave a crater the size of a swimming pool. The fifth struck the communications tower. 5 missiles, 17 seconds between the first and the last. When the dust settled enough for the first responders to move, when the shouting turned to coordination and the flashlights started cutting through clouds of powdered concrete, what they found in the eastern housing block stopped them. 3 soldiers were dead. Not wounded, not unconscious, dead before the roof finished falling. Specialist Darnell Okafor, 23 years old, from Macon, Georgia, on his second rotation overseas. Staff Sergeant Maria Lucero, 29, a logistics coordinator who had been scheduled to rotate home in 11 days. And Private First Class James Aldridge, 20, the youngest member of his unit, who had called his mother 14 hours before the strike and told her he was bored and safe, and could she send more of those oatmeal cookies because the ones in the mess hall tasted like cardboard. 5 more were pulled from adjacent wreckage with injuries that required immediate surgical evacuation. Shrapnel wounds, blast lung, traumatic brain injuries, burns across more than 40% of their bodies. 2 of them would spend weeks in medically induced comas at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. Whether all 5 survived was information that would not be confirmed publicly for a long time. The base fell into a controlled chaos that those who have served recognize as the sound of training meeting reality. Radio calls layered over radio calls, medevac helicopters spinning up in the dark, medics applying tourniquets by headlamp, while someone, somewhere, was already on a satellite phone to U.S. Central Command saying words that had not been spoken in this theater in years. We have American KIA. Confirm 3 killed in action, multiple critical. This is not indirect fire. These were guided munitions. Guided, precision targeted, not the crude, unguided rockets that had become an almost routine nuisance across the region for months. These were ballistic missiles, Iranian-manufactured Fateh-class variants, solid-fueled, road-mobile, capable of carrying a warhead large enough to penetrate reinforced concrete. The kind of weapon a state builds. The kind of weapon a state aims with satellite coordinates and fires with a general's authorization. Within 90 minutes of impact, the entire American intelligence infrastructure in the region shifted posture. Surveillance drones that had been loitering over separate targets were redirected. Satellite tasking orders were rewritten. NSA listening posts across 2 continents adjusted their intercept priorities. And at the Pentagon, where it was still the previous evening in Washington, the senior watch officer placed a call that activated a protocol most of the building's civilian staff had never personally witnessed. The Secretary of Defense was woken. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs was woken. And in a secure conference room 2 levels below the main floor of the Pentagon, a briefing began at 7:22 p.m. Eastern Time that would not end for 14 hours. The question in that room was not whether this was an act of war. The lawyers would argue about that for weeks. The question in that room, the one that turned seasoned military leaders quiet, was simpler and worse. How did they know where our people were sleeping? That question would define everything that followed. If what you just heard made something in your chest tighten, stay exactly where you are. Because the part of this story that matters most has not been told yet. Tap like right now so that this reaches someone tonight who thinks they understand how this happened. They don't. Not yet. What comes next is the part that was supposed to stay classified. The answer did not come from satellite imagery or battlefield forensics. It came from a server room in Bahrain, a nondescript facility operated jointly by U.S. Naval Intelligence and the DHS Cybersecurity Division, staffed around the clock by analysts whose entire job was to intercept, decrypt, and catalog communications flowing through networks linked to Iranian proxy militias across the region. Senior analyst Victor Ashworth had been stationed in that facility for 4 years. He was the kind of intelligence professional whose reputation was built not on dramatic discoveries, but on a relentless, grinding patience. The ability to sit with encrypted noise for months until the pattern surfaced. Ashworth was known for 2 things. He never raised his voice, and he never left his workstation during an active decrypt cycle, not even to eat. His colleagues had seen him sit in the same chair for 19 consecutive hours during a previous crisis, drinking cold coffee and saying nothing, his fingers moving across 3 screens simultaneously without pause. On the night of the strike, Ashworth was not moving. He was staring at a single decoded message that had been intercepted 11 days before the missiles were fired. 11 days. The message had been flagged by the system, routed into a secondary review queue, and buried under 412 other flagged intercepts that week. It had been assigned a priority classification of routine, no immediate action. The message contained coordinates. Those coordinates matched the eastern housing block of Forward Operating Station Kestrel to within 3 meters. Ashworth read the intercept 3 times. Then he pulled the routing history. Who had reviewed it? Who had classified it? Who had decided it did not require escalation? The trail led through 3 separate intelligence processing nodes across 2 countries, each one staffed by credentialed professionals, each one following established protocol. Every step of the chain had functioned exactly as designed, and at every step, the warning had been downgraded. Not by error, not by incompetence. The classification codes used at each node were technically correct. The protocols had been followed, but the cumulative effect was that a message containing the precise sleeping coordinates of American soldiers had traveled through the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus on Earth and arrived nowhere. Ashworth pulled the classification authority records for each downgrade decision. 2 were routine, standard filtering, defensible. The third was not. The third downgrade had been authorized by a single individual, a senior intelligence liaison officer embedded in the Regional Coordination Command, a man whose access clearance gave him visibility into every forward operating base's personnel rotation schedule, defensive posture, and shelter assignment grid. His name was Roland Calder. His official title was Deputy Director of Interagency Threat Integration for the Combined Joint Operations Center. His unofficial function, which Ashworth was only now beginning to understand, was something else entirely. Go back to the beginning of this story. Go back to the moment I told you that the early warning system lost 2 minutes in automated verification cycling. 2 minutes that cost lives. Now ask yourself, what if that delay was not a system error? What if someone who understood exactly how that verification cycle worked had ensured it would take exactly long enough? Sit with that. I will wait. Calder's file was exemplary. 22 years in military intelligence, multiple theater deployments, letters of commendation from 3 different commanding generals, a reputation for quiet competence, the kind of officer who never sought headlines and never needed them, because the people above him trusted his judgment completely. That trust was the weapon. Federal investigators who began examining Calder's digital footprint in the 72 hours following the strike found something that did not match any known model of espionage or corruption. He had not been recruited by a foreign intelligence service in any way that traditional counterintelligence training would recognize. There was no financial trail, no offshore accounts, no sudden lifestyle changes, no unexplained travel. What they found instead was a communication pattern. Over a period of 14 months, Calder had been in intermittent, encrypted contact with an intermediary, a civilian contractor working for a logistics company that supplied non-lethal materials to forward bases across the region. That contractor had ties to a commercial shipping firm registered in Dubai. That firm shared a financial administrator with a front company that intelligence agencies had been tracking for 3 years as a procurement channel for Iranian-backed militia groups. The chain was long, it was deliberate, it was built to be untraceable by anyone who was not looking for it. And it was designed by someone who understood exactly what American intelligence analysts looked for and how to stay below every single threshold. Calder had not sold secrets for money. He had traded access for ideology. The intercepted communications, once fully decrypted by Ashworth's team over the following weeks, revealed a man who had become convinced, through years of exposure to the human cost of American military operations, that the presence of U.S. forces in the region was the root cause of civilian suffering, not its remedy. His messages did not read like those of a spy. They read like those of a man who believed he was performing an act of conscience. The message that contained Kestrel's coordinates had been sent by Calder himself, routed through 3 civilian email accounts, encrypted with commercially available software, and addressed to an intermediary he referred to only as the engineer. He had not ordered the strike, but he had drawn the map. If you are still watching, you already understand that this is no longer a story about missiles. Drop the word coordinates in the comments below. Subscribe, because the next story in this series goes into a place even darker than this one. And send this to someone tonight. Someone who wears the uniform. Someone who has a family member deployed right now. Someone who deserves to know what this story is really about. Every raid, every intelligence briefing, every confident statement made by military officials in the first half of this story, listen to it again, because now you know that the man responsible for integrating threat data across every American base in the theater was the same man routing that threat data to the people building the missiles. Every defensive posture assessment, every shelter assignment grid, every personnel rotation schedule, all of it visible to him. All of it compromised. Go back, listen again, and notice how different the silence sounds. The investigation that followed did not stay within the borders of a single base or a single country. Within weeks, federal investigators and military counterintelligence teams mapped the full extent of Calder's access, and what they found expanded the scope of the crisis beyond anything the initial response teams had anticipated. Calder's position had given him visibility into not just Kestrel, but 11 other forward operating stations across the region. His access credentials, granted as part of his role coordinating interagency threat assessments, allowed him to view real-time personnel data, supply chain routing, drone flight patterns, and the classified schedules of VIP movements, including congressional delegation visits. The damage assessment team calculated that over the 14-month period of his compromised communications, enough information had passed through his hands to endanger thousands of American and allied military personnel. The logistics company that served as the first link in his communication chain operated in 4 countries. Its shipping manifests, once examined by a joint FBI and Naval Criminal Investigative Service task force, revealed patterns consistent with dual-use logistics, legitimate supply deliveries layered on top of covert material transfers. Replacement parts for generators going to American bases on the same shipping routes as components flagged by international non-proliferation databases. The company had passed 3 separate audits in 2 years. Every audit had been conducted using criteria that Calder's office had helped establish. He had not just exploited the system, he had written the rules the system used to check itself. On the deepest partition of a hard drive, seized from the Dubai-registered shipping firm, encrypted with military-grade protocols that took Ashworth's team 11 days to break, investigators found a single document. It was not a communication, it was not a list of names or coordinates. It was a planning framework, a 63-page blueprint outlining a long-term strategy for degrading American intelligence gathering capability across the entire region through the systematic placement of ideologically motivated individuals in mid-level coordination roles. Not generals, not politicians, not anyone who would ever face a Senate confirmation hearing or a public background check. Middle managers, liaison officers, the people who decided which reports got read and which ones got filed. The document was not written by Calder. It was written for people like him. A recruitment and operational template designed to identify, cultivate, and activate individuals inside Western military and intelligence structures who could be turned, not through money or blackmail, but through moral exhaustion. The document had no author attribution. It had no date, but it referenced American base designations that had only been assigned within the last 3 years, meaning whoever wrote it had access to current, classified infrastructure terminology. The system had not been broken into from the outside. The system had been hollowed out from within. Somewhere in Macon, Georgia, there is a woman named Pauline Okafor who still sets a place at her kitchen table for a son who is not coming home. She does not know about Roland Calder. She does not know about the intercepted message that sat in a queue for 11 days while her son slept in a building whose coordinates had already been sent to the people who would destroy it. She does not know that the system designed to protect him had been quietly redesigned to fail him. She knows only that her phone rang at a time when phones are not supposed to ring, and that the voice on the other end used words she had spent 23 years praying she would never hear. She has those oatmeal cookies on her counter, the ones he asked for. They are still in the shipping box. She cannot bring herself to open it, and she cannot bring herself to throw it away. Across the communities surrounding every base where the fallen and wounded had served, the cost expressed itself not in strategic assessments, but in the quiet details that never make it into briefings. A high school football team in Texas that held a moment of silence for a former player whose name was now on a casualty list. A fire station in Ohio that flew its flag at half-staff for a paramedic's son who had joined the Army because his mother told him service was the highest form of love. A 6-year-old girl in North Carolina who drew a picture of a man in a uniform and taped it to the front door because her father had told her before he deployed that he would always come home through that door, and she wanted to make sure he could find it. This was not collateral damage from a foreign policy dispute. This was a deliberate act of violence against individual human beings whose names someone in a position of trust had helped reduce to coordinates on a targeting grid. Power does not always arrive on a missile. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet reclassification of a single intelligence report. A downgrade from urgent to routine. A 2-minute delay in a warning system that was supposed to function in seconds. A handshake between men in a logistics office that smelled like diesel fuel and stale coffee. And by the time anyone understands what was allowed to happen, the people who could have been saved are already gone. Federal investigators confirmed that Calder was taken into custody at a secure location 11 days after the strike. The full scope of indictments stemming from the investigation remains incomplete. Multiple individuals connected to the logistics chain and the intermediary network are being sought across 4 countries. The 63-page blueprint recovered from the seized hard drive is now the subject of what officials have described only as the most significant counterintelligence review since the Cold War. The missiles that hit forward operating station Kestrel traveled 600 miles, but the betrayal that guided them there traveled through the very heart of the system built to prevent it. And for the families of 3 American soldiers who did not survive the night of the 27th, no investigation, no indictment, no classified review will ever be enough. Because the question they carry is not about intelligence failures or policy debates or geopolitical strategy. Their question is simpler, and it will never have an answer that feels like enough. Why wasn't he protected? This story is fictional, but the wound it describes is not invented. The names are created for this narration. The agencies are real. The patterns of institutional failure, of trust exploited from within, of warnings that arrive too late because someone ensured they would, those patterns are documented, studied, and debated in rooms most people will never enter. If this moved something in you tonight, let it move you somewhere real, like this. Leave a comment, share it with someone who serves, someone who has served, someone who loves a person in uniform. Subscribe, because the next story demands the same attention you gave this one. And remember Specialist Okafor, remember Staff Sergeant Lucero, remember Private First Class Aldridge. They are not real, but the people they represent are waiting for someone to remember them. Every name, every official, every event described in this story is entirely fictional, created for dramatic storytelling purposes only. The military branches and agencies referenced are real. The themes of institutional vulnerability and human cost are grounded in documented, real-world concerns. The story itself is not real.